Telosa is not merely a megacity but a vision for society as a whole. This gigantic city, worth a mind-numbing $400 billion, is meant to be, in the words of those behind it, a future utopia. It is built with the goals of sustainable development, inclusion, and technological progress in mind. Or at least that is how the billionaire behind the project makes it out to be. Sustainability and progress are huge buzzwords, but there must be some solid ground to back them up. With the initial phase set to be completed in 2030, you might think the project is already standing on solid ground, bringing the future closer to us. However, the fact is that even the location of the city has not been decided yet. This already raises a few red flags about the credibility of the project developers. But believe me, this is only the beginning of the story. In today's video, we'll examine Telosa, the futuristic city, to see if it's really the next step in civilization's progress, or just the dream of a billionaire who will be stuck forever in the development stage. Let's jump right in. Welcome back to PST Mega Projects. Plans for the development of Telosa were first announced back in 2021 by billionaire Mark Lohr, the former CEO of the gigantic retail chain Walmart. The name Telosa is derived from the Greek word telos, which roughly means higher purpose. This fits well with the aim of the project, as revealed by Lohr, to build a city where the people are at the center. In other words, the plan is not just to develop a cool-looking metropolis for tourists and rich people, but to focus on sustainable development, affordability, and the inclusion of diverse groups of people, especially underserved minorities. In Lohr's words, Telosa is meant to be a future utopia that serves as a model for other megacity projects and contributes to solving the problems of pollution, wealth gaps, and overpopulation. In line with Lohr's vision, the master plan for Telosa was developed by world-famous Danish architect Bjarke Ingels, who has experience with building future cities like Telosa, given that he's been commissioned to design a similar, albeit smaller, future city in Japan. But so far, this is all too abstract. So what are the concrete plans? How is Telosa actually going to be a sustainable city and a welcoming place for diverse groups of people? There are a number of ways it may be able to do that. First, let's focus on the city's housing plan. Housing in Telosa will follow a community land trust model. This means that all the land in Telosa will be owned and managed by a trust, which is the city's local community government in this case, rather than individual homeowners. Residents will be able to lease their homes and enjoy all the rights of a homeowner without actually owning the land. How is this in the best interests of those who live in Telosa? The fact that the land will be government-owned means that most real estate profits will be managed by the government and added to the trust. For example, the government will be able to add conditions to the lease to the effect that homeowners must give a certain percentage of their profit to the trust if they decide to sell their property. Additionally, having a community government manage real estate profits and costs can save a lot of money that private real estate developers and brokers who only care about their profit would otherwise be pocketed. The trust money will be used to reduce housing costs and provide financial assistance to underprivileged people, improving the city's overall affordability and socioeconomic conditions. In fact, this housing model has been successful in various parts of the US. According to the Democracy Collaborative, there are currently 277 community land trusts in the US. 79% of the residents of these areas are first-time home buyers, 82% earn half or less of their local area median income, and 31% identify as people of color. This is basically because these trusts are established with the underprivileged in mind, which tend to be members of minorities. It seems then that this model goes well with Lohr's vision for inclusion. Next, we move to the city's urban planning. Telosa will be designed so that most services are within a 15-minute commute at the most. Public transportation will be provided, and only electric cars will be used. This is not to mention that residents will be able to go almost anywhere on foot or by bike. The result is a city free of air and noise pollution. Finally, it's claimed that Telosa will be a self-sustaining city. That is, it will be able to produce more energy than it consumes. This will be achieved thanks to the installation of solar panels all over the city and several windmills placed at strategic locations. One of the city's largest buildings will be a tower with a water storage system and farms producing food for most of the city. The initial phase of the project is ambitiously set to be completed in 2030 and is estimated to cost $25 billion. By then, it's projected that 50,000 people will be living in Telosa. The entire project is predicted to be completed roughly by 2050 and will cost a staggering $400 billion. Lohr believes that around 5 million people will be living in the city when the project is finished. So far, Telosa probably seems like a promising project, and a big shift from the typical futuristic megacities designed only to look astonishing or attract tourists and rich people. This is why lore believes it's better than the line, Saudi Arabia's $1 trillion megacity currently under development. The problem with the line, he thinks, is that impressive as it is, it still prioritizes tourism and luxury over affordability and sustainability. To evaluate his claim on your own and find out much more about the line, be sure to check out the video where we look at it in depth. In any case, we should take the plans and claims made by project developers with a grain of salt, since they're obviously interested in publicity and attracting investors. Several futuristic megacities were announced in the past, only to fail to achieve any of their aims years later. Consider, for instance, California City. When it was first announced in 1958, it was claimed to be able to become larger than Los Angeles or San Francisco. 60 years later, though, the city is now a ghost town, inhabited only by 15,000 people. To take a more recent example, Forest City was a $100 billion green megacity announced in 2006. Part of it has already been built in Myanmar. Unfortunately, the project has been halted, and as of now, it's also a ghost town inhabited by a few thousand people. If you'd like to hear more about the enlightening story of how Forest City rose and fell, make sure you check out our video in which we cover its story in detail. The reasons for these failures often include environmental or socioeconomic factors unaccounted for by the unrealistic and overly ambitious plans announced by project developers. We should then realistically look at the concrete facts relevant to this project to have an idea of how feasible or successful it will be. Unfortunately, it turns out that the deeper we dig, the more skeptical we'll become of Telosa. First of all, even the location of Telosa hasn't yet been decided. It will be somewhere in the desert in the American Southwest, most likely in Arizona or Utah. But beyond that, nothing is known. This already casts doubt on the credibility of the project developers, since all information so far has been part of a future plan with nothing concrete to back it up. Even if we set that aside, there are good reasons to be skeptical of the ability of the developers to complete this project or make any meaningful progress. A big problem is that Telosa will be built in the middle of the desert. The reason for this is obvious. The land is very cheap, but it's very doubtful that the cheap cost of the land will compensate for the extremely high expenses that necessarily come with any attempt to build a giant city in the desert. First, a city of 5 million people would need huge amounts of water to sustain itself, but Telosa will be far away from natural water resources. It's doubtful that groundwater alone can satisfy a city of this size. It also doesn't help that, being a green city, Telosa will include a great number of trees and plants, which will surely drive up its water consumption by a lot. Second, building infrastructure from scratch in a desert will be a great challenge. To say the least, trying to connect Telosa to natural water resources and existing infrastructure like sewage systems will require a wide and far-reaching infrastructure network. This is a mega project on its own. Aside from the cost of building such a network, the cost of regularly maintaining it is the real challenge. The problem of costly maintenance is well known because of a very familiar instance in American suburbs. Because American suburbs stretch across large areas, connecting all houses to amenities requires a wide infrastructure network. Such a network is usually expensive to maintain, which is why U.S. suburbs are financially unviable. It's estimated that they cost an additional amount of $1 trillion annually, compared to other types of urban planning, which is roughly 6% of the entire U.S. GDP. Telosa will have a similar problem. Will it be sustainable for the city to spend billions on maintenance alone regularly? Seems unlikely. Considering the project's cost, we can now turn to an even more obvious and related issue: funding. According to the developers, Telosa will be funded by private investors, philanthropists, and possibly government funds. The pressing question here is whether enough investors will be willing to channel $400 billion into a project with such an uncertain future. In the case of the line, which is also being built in the middle of the desert, the project is backed by the Saudi Arabian government, so the source of funding is clear. As for Telosa, we don't yet know. We've already seen it's doubtful whether the city will be able to handle water consumption and maintenance costs. It's also unlikely that a lot of people would want to live there in a high-temperature area that's cut off from other forms of civilization. This is sure to deter many investors. Overall, it's very doubtful whether this project will ever be completed. Having an ambitious plan for the future is one thing, but facing the difficult practical realities of the present is a completely different matter. Perhaps a better way to improve the future will be investing in existing cities to make them more environment-friendly and affordable. Well, that's it for today. What do you think about Telosa? Will it ever be completed? Is there a better way of investing in the future? We'd like to know, so make sure to leave a comment below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next one.